I have this habit that we're watching a movie or something like that, or I see somebody walk by, or we're at a restaurant and I look over and I see somebody, I'll say to Lenore, that person reminds me of this person, okay? Or this person, the way they said that, they do this exactly like this other person. And on the very, very rare occasion, Lenore will actually agree with me that she can see the resemblance that I spot there. But in our Bibles, there is often the same sort of thing where it compares somebody to somebody else or somebody to something else. And many times, even in Jesus' teaching, he uses a lot of illustrations and a lot of object lessons on things around us. And the field right to harvest, and comparing that to souls. And we are often talked about as sheep because we are very much like sheep, not so soft and cuddly, but as silly brain-wise as sheep are. But especially in the Old Testament, there is one that is, as a couple, that is often compared when it's talking about kings. And we have the kings of the northern kingdom, and after virtually every single one of those kings, it says, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord like his father, who? Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. All right, over and over and over again, we see that similar phrase, like this fellow, because he was so evil. And also on the other flip side of that is we have the kings of Judah, and it will refer often to them, and it'll say, he was not righteous, did not have a heart towards God like his father David, or he had a heart very similar to, and use that exact phrase, but he had a heart that was good like Hezekiah, did things like David, and then maybe there's an exception and so forth in there. But there's those comparisons that are made, and David is really held as the gold standard of the kings, all right? God holds him as the gold standard of the kings. And we think, well, all of these things that David did that was wrong, but nonetheless, David had a heart. He fell and he sinned just like all of us do, all right? But his heart would come back. And that's what we need, to have that, just like what Alicia played there, and nearer my God to thee. We need to have that heart to when we do fall, and it's not an excuse, all right? It's not say, well, I can fall because I can come back. That line of thinking should never enter our minds, all right? But when we do fall, we need to be willing and able to come back so quickly to him to restore that fellowship with him. Jesus, David had these great qualifications, and actually Jesus gave us the qualifications of a leader. One of these verses we looked at this morning, and that is in one of them. So Luke chapter 16 and verse 10, Jesus says this. It says, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much, and he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. Jesus is telling us here that in order to be faithful in much, to have that leadership responsibility, you need to be faithful. That is not always the case with leaders, all right? But in his category, what Christ is telling us here, in order to be a leader for him, you need to be faithful. Here's the verse we looked at this morning in Matthew 25, verse 21. It says, his Lord said unto him, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. And God made David a ruler. But what was David? David was just a shepherd. Just a lowly shepherd. We see, take your Bibles and come with me, please, to 1 Samuel chapter 16. 1 Samuel 16. Very familiar passage. Samuel is told to go anointing a new king because Saul has blown it like crazy. And Samuel comes to the house of Jesse, and they have this feast that's there, and he has the brothers come before him. Look at verse number 10. It says, and again Jesse made 7 of his sons to pass before Samuel. And Samuel said unto Jesse, the Lord hath not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, are here all thy children? Is this all you've got? Just the 7? And he said, there remaineth yet the youngest, and behold, he keepeth the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and fetch him, for we will not sit down till he come hither. He says, yeah, there's still one left. He's the youngest, but he's just the youngest. He's with the sheep. A little while ago, I can't remember if I told you this story, but a little while ago, that must have been during Christmas. And Andrea, our daughter-in-law, says, well, why don't we set up your slide projector and we'll look at some slides. So we pulled out all our slides, and we were going through these slides with Andrea and Drew and Allie and Jonah. And slide after slide after slide we showed, and there was no pictures of Drew, the youngest. And they're saying, didn't you take any pictures of me at all? And it got to be a bit of a joke. And then there's actually a friend of ours, Jacob, who's younger than Drew. We had a picture of him, but we went through box after box after box of slides, and there's poor Drew, not a one slide picture. So we kind of try to make things good for him. Well, we must have switched over to prints at that time. We've got all kinds of prints pictures of you, just no slides, But that's kind of the way it is, The younger one kind of gets all the leftover clothes, and you take, your firstborn child, you take 1 million pictures of them, and then 500,000 your secondborn. Time you get to number 8, we don't even know where the camera is anymore, all right? But there's David. Yeah, he's the youngest, and he's just out in the field. What do you want him for? We're not going to sit down until you bring the youngest here too. And they brought David in, and David was just a shepherd. There's a lot of guys in the Bible, men in the Bible, that are just a shepherd. Abel was just a shepherd. Abel. Cain and Abel? There he is. One of the first people to ever be born. I can't remember which one. I think Cain was born first before Abel, because we always say Cain and Abel. But he was a shepherd. The neat thing about just as a sidetrack here, this shepherd, Abel, was a righteous man. He was a righteous man. Cain was a religious man. No righteousness there. Just religion. I'll do this because I need to. And I'm sure that if you were to look at the altar that Cain had there, it was probably beautiful with flowers and wonderful fruit and everything. That's not what God wanted. It's not what God asked for. And he could have easily switched that over, but Cain was just religious. Religious doesn't get you anywhere, folks. All right? But Abel was righteous. Abel was just a shepherd. Moses, God called him the meekest man on the planet. And he used Moses to bring all of Israel out of Egypt. Moses was just a shepherd. 40 years he spent being a shepherd. From the time he was 40, the first 40 years he had it made in the shade. He was living in a castle. He had everything there. And then when he ran away, he spent the next 40 years till he was 80 years old out in the fields watching over sheep. We have Jacob. And Sean preached a great message on Wednesday night. If you weren't here, you missed a great message. And he doesn't particularly like Jacob because of all Jacob's character qualities. But you know what? Jacob was a shepherd. And I get amazed. Actually, I was talking with someone else too. And he's amazed at the same thing. We look and we see how this guy put these different things in here. And he managed to genetically change the way that sheep and goats were born so that they ended up being his with ring straked and so forth. And I don't know how he did that, but he knew what he was doing with sheep. He was a shepherd. And Moses, as I said, was a shepherd. And David was a shepherd. But it's more than just somebody that keeps sheep that makes him a shepherd, that makes him a real shepherd. David had a shepherd's heart. Sheep are different from cattle. You can drive cattle. You can't drive sheep. You get the cattle going, you can get a stampede, and you can kind of keep them together, and they'll all, and get out of the way because they're just going to keep on going, and you can move them. If you try that with sheep, they'll go, and they'll scatter, and they'll be all over. Well, now what do? You know what you have to do with sheep? You have to lead sheep. You can drive cattle from the back, but sheep have to be led. And that's why, one of the reasons God compares us to sheep, we need to be led. Sheep have a very poor eyesight for an animal. Very poor eyesight. And they have an absolutely atrocious sense of direction. They can get lost in a field that they're in all the time. They have a terrible sense of direction. And the shepherd has to make sure that he leads those sheep and he watches those sheep. And, oh, no, there goes Mabel, and go get her and bring her back into where she needs to be, because they have to be led. And a shepherd has to care for his sheep, so much more so than other different animals. We get to 1 Samuel chapter 17, and this is probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It is a fantastic passage, and it's talking about David, and at least 5 times during this episode of David versus Goliath, do we have David referring to him being a shepherd or referring to his sheep, because David was a shepherd at heart. You remember Saul? Saul wasn't a shepherd. Saul had to take care of donkeys, and he didn't do a very good job of that either. They were lost, and he had to go find these donkeys, all right? But David was a shepherd, but a real shepherd. A real shepherd. Jesus tells us, take your Bibles and come with me to keep your finger there in 1 Samuel, but come with me to John chapter 10. Jesus tells us what a real shepherd is. John chapter 10, in verse 11, starting in verse number 11, we have, and Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. Jesus calls himself a shepherd. I am calling him just a shepherd and lowly shepherds, but Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is an hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and he leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth, because he is a hireling, and he careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known of mine. A hireling is someone who's just there, and he looks like a shepherd. You think he is. He's out in the field with the sheep, and he's moving the sheep around, and he's a shepherd. And along comes the wolf. He's not a shepherd anymore. They're not paying me to do that. I'll stand here and I'll watch and I'll say, there's the green grass, sheep, but something comes along here to eat you. Your lamb chops, all right? And he's gone. That's a hireling. That's a hireling. They don't have the heart of a shepherd. David had the heart of a shepherd. David didn't run away. David comes to before, look at chapter 17 of 1 Samuel. Come back there again. We're done with John, but chapter 17 in verse number 34 and 35, he talks to Saul about what had happened before when things happened with his sheep. It says, and David said unto Saul, thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came not a wolf, but a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock, and I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. I think I might stand somewhat of a chance against a wolf. It's a big, mean dog. I probably get pretty hurt, but I don't want to attack a bear, and I don't want to attack a lion. I don't stand any chance against those. But there's David. Because he has a heart. He has a heart for his sheep. David is a shepherd at heart. David didn't run away. And you know what's beautiful about David? It's David that writes the 23rd Psalm. And how does the 23rd Psalm start? Talk to me. Here we go. The Lord is my shepherd. He knows all about what being a shepherd is. He says, but the Lord is my shepherd. I follow him. He's the one who leads me. He is genuinely set apart from all of the rest of the kings, and God has made him, as I mentioned earlier, the gold standard. But that doesn't stop him, doesn't make him immune from having critics. Read a story about President Lincoln. It says an army officer asked President Lincoln if he could write an article defending the administration against attacks regarding the war. And Lincoln replied this, he says, if I were to try to read, much less answer all the attacks made on me, this shop might as well be closed for any other business. I do the very best I know how, the very best I can, and I mean to keep doing so until the end. If the end brings me out all right, what is said against me won't amount to anything. And if the end brings me out to be wrong, 10 angels swearing that I was right will make no difference. Wasn't going to defend himself against the critics, but criticism comes, all right? We all face criticism at one time or another, and some face more criticism than others. It's how we handle that criticism that really matters. And David had many critics, and tonight we are going to look at 3 tall critics that David faced. Can anybody tell me who the 3 tall critics that David faced? Can you tell me who they are? You have to get all 3. Get all 3, I'll buy you a chocolate bar. Your choice. What do we got? Anybody know? 3 tall critics that David faced. What's that? His brother. You picked the hardest one first, Deb. That's the one I didn't think anybody get. Who are the other 2 tall critics? It wasn't the rest of his brothers. Goliath is really tall, all right, 10-footer. Saul is really tall, okay? So who do I give the chocolate bar to? I guess it'll be to, I guess I'll get to each one. How's that, all right? David's brother, David's king, and David's foe there as Goliath, all right? But our first critic, I want you to see, the first critic that we have can be, that we all can face, is family. Family sometimes is critical of what we're going to do. Family can be critical of us doing something for the Lord. And that, in this case, David had family that was critical of what he was going to do for the Lord. He faced his first critic, who was a tall guy, as Deb pointed out. I really didn't think anybody was going to get that one, Deb. That was very good. Come with me, if you will, to chapter 16 and verse number 7. Verse number 7. Chapter 16, he comes first. It says, and the Lord said unto Samuel, let me back up verse 6. And it came to pass, when they were to come, and he looked on Eliab, he said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. And the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance, or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. He looked at him, and Eliab had 3 things that I don't have. He was tall, he was dark, and he was handsome, all right? I don't know what's wrong with short, fat, and dumpy, but that's me. But at any rate, okay, Eliab was of tall stature, and he was a good-looking guy, all right, and he had that going about him. As Samuel looked at him, he thought that he was him, that this is the guy. You know, we see here that. Let me just move on a little bit further here to show you something here. All 7 of these brothers, Eliab the first and the other 6 that followed, God told Samuel, those aren't the guys. Not one of those men are going to be the next king. And when David came, I want you to see what happened when he took David and he anointed him as the king. Look at verse 13. It says, and Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him where? In the midst of his brethren. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. We have here, before all of his brothers, here is the runt of the litter out in the field. We're not even going to he's not even invited to the big dinner with Samuel. Until Samuel says, there's got to be another one, because none of these guys are the ones. None of these men are the ones. And they bring David in, and David is anointed. Eliab has been turned down, essentially, and now the runt of the litter, David, is being anointed by the prophet Samuel. All right? How do you think that made Eliab feel? There is a thing out there. This is a real thing, and it's called pretty privilege. Has anybody ever heard of that before? You look it up. It's on the internet. Wikipedia will tell you what it is. Pretty privilege. That is, and they've done studies on this, people that are good-looking, people that have that great physical shape, or whatever they are, but people that are good-looking get advantages that the rest of us don't get. They get privileges, they get benefits that others do not get. They get opportunities for promotion and so forth, strictly because of somebody looks at them and thinks, oh, they're good looking, and they will get these things that others will not get. That's where I think Eliab's at. And I think there was some jealousy here in Eliab, and that is brought forward later when we see what happens with him when David comes to see his brothers. The war is happening. The Philistines are the arch enemy at this point of Israel. And it's interesting that it's the Philistines. If we were to back up before Samuel's the last judge. He anoints the first king, Saul. And before Samuel is several other kings before. Well, the very first judge that came, there's a reason why he came. Israel turned against God, and every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And then what God would do is he would send some people in to capture them and to oppress them. And then the people would say, oh, woe is me. And they would turn back and they'd say, God, if you get us out of this, send us someone to deliver us. And then God would send a deliverer. And the first judge was a man named Othniel. And the king that was the king of Mesopotamia. And this king's name, I just like his name. It's got 17 letters in this name. His name is Chushan-Rishathaim. I just think it's a funny name. You put that on the back of a jersey, all right? Come down both sleeves, all right? And Chushan-Rishathaim, this king of Mesopotamia, was holding down the Israelites, and they asked for a relief, and God sent Othniel. And Othniel got them free from those from Mesopotamia. The next one, his name was Ehud. And Ehud was a king of Eglon, and it was the Moabites that were now oppressing Israel. The next guy's name was Shamgar, and it was the Philistines, but he delivered them from the Philistines. And then we have Deborah and Barak that were there, and they were Canaanites that had come in, and over this cycle would happen where they would turn and they would worship idols and so forth, and God would say, okay, I'm going to let some enemies come in and to capture you and to oppress you, and they would do that, and then they would turn back to God, and God would send them over and over and over again, a new judge. All right? We have Gideon who comes in, and there's the Midianites that are there, and we know the passage about Gideon, how great that is. And each one finished his job and got rid of those oppressors until the Philistines came, and God sent them a new judge after they turned. And this new judge was a superhero. He had everything except for two things to make him a qualified superhero. He didn't have a cape and he didn't have a secret identity. But other than that, it was Samson. Samson had more physical ability than anybody else, of any of the judges. But you know what Samson did? He began to deliver them from the Philistines. He didn't finish the job. He couldn't finish the job. After Samson comes Samuel, and we still have the Philistines. They'd let them in, didn't get rid of them, and the Philistines had taken a great hold on Israel. They didn't belong there. That was Israel's land. God had given them that land. And yet the Philistines had a firm grip on that, and they were fighting in the war. And David's three older brothers were there in the war, fighting with them, and they were there, and David's father says, David, I want you to take some of these cheeses and so forth and give these to the captain of the 1,000 of your brothers. And David goes, we know, and he leaves his sheep with a keeper with those sheep. He's not a shepherd. He's a hireling. He leaves them with them, and he gets in a wagon, and he comes to see where his brothers are. And while he's there and his brothers, they've been there for quite some time, because this is day 40 of when Goliath comes out to challenge the people. He said, you send me your champion. Who should be their champion? You'd think that Goliath, who is 10 feet tall, the tallest person in Israel, happens to be their king, Saul, who is head and shoulders above everybody else, but he is dwarfed by Goliath. Saul is no match for Goliath. Eliab is no match for Goliath. Abner, Saul's captain is no match for Goliath. And Goliath comes out and he challenges them all. And David is there, and David is astonished. I want you to take a look at chapter 17 and look at just the last half of verse 26 to see why it is bothering him so much. He says, "What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Who does this guy think he is? Who does this man think that he is, that he can defy God, the armies of God? And he is asking these people this, and so forth, and going on, but we see that Eliab steps up to the plate here. Verse 28 says, "And Eliab, his eldest brother, the one who got first passed over, the one who was tall, good-looking, strong guy, when he heard him when he spake to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? You belong in the field, little brother. That's where you belong with your sheep. I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. You're just a little kid. For thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. You just want to see us fight. What are you doing here?" And there's David. He's asking, why are these people allowing this man to come out here and defy God, and nobody is doing anything about this? And he is challenged by his brother. Familiarity breeds contempt. I'm sure you've heard that saying before. And I wonder if Eliab is even thinking, I'm the one that, I should have been the one that was anointed, not this little runt who belongs out in the field. But familiarity can make us look at someone and think they're too normal for this feat. And Jesus addresses that in Mark chapter 6 and verse 4. It says, "But Jesus said unto them, A prophet is not without honor, but in his own country, and among his own kin, and in his own house." That's where a prophet of God isn't recognized as a prophet of God. It goes even further than that. It goes even further than that in that Jesus himself, the Son of God, doing all these miracles, as we mentioned this morning with all those cities, Capernaum and Chorazin and Bethsaida, and did all those miracles that were there and all over the place to show people that he was God. His own brothers didn't believe him until after he rose from the dead. And Jesus went and he spoke with his brother James after he rose from the dead. Even his own brothers didn't believe him because family can be too close. That familiarity can breed contempt. And Eliab is in the same boat here where he looks at David and he thinks, what are you doing here? You don't belong here. All right? But David didn't retaliate. This is David. This is the man with the shepherd's heart. This is the man with a man after God's own heart. He didn't retaliate and say, "Listen here, big brother. Samuel anointed me to be the next king. You don't like that, do you?" That's not what David did. He couldn't do that because that's just not who he is, or God wouldn't have brought him to that spot. It takes some character to be careful as to what we say. In James chapter 3 and verse 2, it says, "For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body." God says it takes some fortitude, some manliness to be able to control what we say. And David had that character. As that man with the shepherd's heart, he didn't put his brother into a place where he belonged. I kind of wonder what happened after the fact, after he kills Goliath and he becomes the king, years down the road, how Eliab now treats his brother. I think things changed then, but up until then, it'd be like Jesus' brothers. They didn't change until after he rose from the dead. And we have two of Jesus' half-brothers, James, we just read a verse from, and Jude, another one of Jesus' half-brothers that wrote the book of Jude, all right, that they recognized who he was. But we have here that, David's response to him is very simple. Verse 29, and David said, what have I now done? Is there not a cause? Can't you see there is a reason? Why? There's a reason. There is a reason why I should be here. Things don't just happen by chance. God orchestrates some things to happen to give us opportunities to serve him. But he says, can't you see that the need that is there? Those that are familiar with us may not see how God can use us. And they may try to discourage you. And I have personally heard family discourage other family when they are trying to do what God wants them to do, because they can't picture in their mind this person they know so well or that they've been raised with or whatever, that God can use them in a special way. It's just a blind spot. It's a blind spot we have. But let me ask you this. Is it a fluke that God has made you the way that you are for whatever task that is there? Is it a fluke that God has you where you are? Is it a fluke that God has you there at that particular time, that he wants to use you? Are you there for a reason? Critic number 2. We have critic number 1 being family. Critic number 2, I call the big ego. Those that maybe think that they ought to be the one, but they can't do it. So if they can't do it, then you can't do it, because what I see in you is just not good enough. People hear what David is saying. So he's going around, he's asking, why isn't there somebody doing something about this? What's the reward for doing something like this? What's going to happen to the person that takes this guy down? And he's flabbergasted. He's not so much looking for the reward. Understand here. He's saying, what is going on? Why will no one challenge this man? And word gets back to Saul. There's a guy out there that's saying he's just a young one. He's not even a soldier. And he's asking about this, so Saul brings him in to see him. And Saul looks at him, and he's just a young man. He's just a youth, is what he's called. And he says, well, you can't do this. And David's response, David assures him, look at verse 32. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. He says, don't worry, I'll go take him down. I'll do this. I'll go fight with him. And Saul says, you can't do this. Saul's looking at him, if I can't do this, look how big I am, and I'm a soldier, and I've been that way, you can't possibly do this. Verse 33, Saul said to David, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. When he was your size, he was already killing people. You can't do this. You can't. David says to him, David has never killed a giant. And he says, I may never have done anything in this magnitude before, but God has used me. God has used me, and he will use me again. And I think the key verse for this whole thing here is in verse number 37. It says, and David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. He says, he was not, when he took down that bear and he took down that lion, he didn't say that it was him that was doing it. He's saying, you know what? God used me, and God protected me. You know why? Because God is my shepherd. And he says, God, he's done this before. I know that God can do it again. Not that I'm going to kill Goliath, but that God can use me to do this, because he is defying the armies of God. His offense isn't against me or you or anybody else. His offense is against God. Does he not know what he is doing here? Jesus set the same kind of example for us. Remember what he said? he said, not thy will, not my will, but thine be done. Jesus said in John chapter 5 and verse 30, I can of mine own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which has sent me. It's God. God is the number one reason here. And that's what David is telling Saul. He says, it's not me, it's God. The same God who delivered me out of the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. He's nothing before God. Critic number 3 is the ungodly. Critic number 3 is the ungodly. We have the next tall critic for David. He's 10 feet tall. Tried to do some math once to figure out how heavy this guy would be at 10 feet tall. And we're talking hundreds and hundreds of pounds, maybe over 1,000 pounds by the time you exponentially go out. He's huge. He's huge. But this man, he comes before David, or David comes before him. Look at verse number 42. David comes there before him, and it says, and when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. He looked at him and he disdained him like, you are nothing. You are just a nothing. Just a little, I could fluff you off like that. He disdained him. It was just an insult for this little guy compared to him to come out there. And it says that he absolutely disdained him. And he looked at him, he disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. We said not only did he disdain him, but verse number 3, it says that, and the Philistine said unto David, am I a dog that comest at me with staves? He degraded him down to, you command me with a stick? Sticks and stones. Well, actually he didn't say stones because he didn't know about the stones until a little bit later, all right? But he says, you come at me with a stick? A stave. That's like a staff is what it is. David still had his staff. I think he probably put that down when he ran towards Goliath in a minute here, but he says, wait, you're coming at me with a stick? Look at my sword. Look at my shield. Look at my armor. Look at what I've got. And you're coming at me with a stick? Verse 44, he says, you are nothing. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. You're nothing, little boy. What are you doing? The ungodly will criticize. I have heard of many situations and even seen some personally where ungodly people have done what they can to demean those that are trying to do things for God. But like we looked at that verse this morning in Luke chapter 10 and verse 16, it says, he that heareth you heareth me. And he that despiseth you despiseth me. And he that despiseth me despiseth him that sent me. You know what? We belong to God. When somebody turns on us, they're turning on Christ. They're turning on God the Father. That's what Jesus tells us there in Luke 10 verse 16. And it didn't matter what this giant said to David and tried to show him that he was nothing, because David is not standing there and saying, you're ungodly, you're going to face godly David. No. David was saying, you're going to face God. Not me, you're going to face God. Verse 45, it says, and then said David to the Philistine, thou comest to me with the sword and with the spear and with the shield, but I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. And this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand. It's all about God. It's all about God, not about David. He didn't go in there, look, I took down a bear and a lion. I can take down you too. No. He says it's all about God. God did all this. And you're defying God here. And it's all about him. And he says, it's God's deliverance in reality. It says, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee and take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcass of the host of the Philistines this day into the fowls of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. There's a God in Israel. This isn't my fight. This is God's fight. Verse 47. And all this assembly, you know what that assembly includes? All this assembly, all of Israel, and all of the people behind you, all of you Philistines, are going to know this. This is what you're going to know. The whole assembly is going to know this, that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's. The battle is the Lord's. It's not my fight. This is God's fight. And I don't know how many times I've read this, but then I noticed something kind of unique here. It's not really unique. I just never really paid attention. Verse 48. And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose, and came and drew nigh to meet David, that David hasted and ran toward the army. He didn't just run towards Goliath. He ran towards the entire Philistine army. One little guy with a stick and 5 little rocks in his pocket, and he's going towards that whole army because he knows he's got God. He runs towards him, and we know the rest of the fact of what he does. He puts the stone in the sling, and he fires it, and he nails old Goliath right in the forehead, and Goliath falls down on the ground, and David runs over there, and what am I going to do? Pulls out his sword, stands on his back or on his chest, depending on which way that Goliath probably went backwards after getting hit in the head with a rock, and he stands on his stomach or his chest and pulls out the sword, and whew, Goliath is now 8'8" rather than 10 foot tall, all right? And David walks around for the rest of the day, sorry, this is gross, carrying Goliath's head with him, all right? And but let me ask you this question. Was David crazy to fight Goliath? 3 questions. Was he crazy to fight Goliath? Was David super brave to fight Goliath? Or how about this third one? Did David just trust God that much? It wasn't crazy. Yeah, there's a definite token of bravery in there, but that's not it. That's not it. It's his trust in God. As you hear what David says, there is no doubt in his mind at all that Goliath has met his match in God. It's beyond confidence, and it's not confidence in himself. His confidence is in God. You have lost. It didn't matter that his brother, who knew David since he was an infant, thought that, you know what, you're in the wrong place in the wrong time and you can't do this. And David said, but God. It didn't matter about Saul, who is the king over all of Israel, head and shoulders taller than everybody else, that tries to offer his armor to David that says, you can't do this. David says, but God. And Goliath, this mammoth of a man, who would dwarf Shaquille O'Neal or Haystack Calhoun or any of those other big people that we've heard of before. Andre the Giant would be Andre the Dwarf next to Goliath. It didn't matter what Goliath said, because David said, but God. It's God. David trusted God. David had that shepherd's heart, that he believed that God was everything. And he says, the Lord is my shepherd. You know what a sheep does? A sheep trusts his shepherd. David knew that. And when David said, the Lord is my shepherd, I trust you with everything. I trust you. How much do we trust God? Don't let somebody else get in your way when God tells you that I want you to do something. Because familiarity breeds contempt, and we may look at it and say, well, you know, you can't, you've never, I don't think so. God knows. Why did God put you where you are? Why did God make you the way that you are? Why did God put you here at this particular time? It's to please him. We just got to say those 2 words. But God. But God. Let's pray. Precious Father, thank you so much for your goodness.